I'm Guy Howard. I'm here to have a fireside chat about cybersecurity, cyber threats, and the types of things that we're doing to defend against
Hi, I'm Nitin Natarajan, the former Deputy Director at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. It's great to be here with you today.
them. Yeah, great to be here with you as well. So I thought maybe we'd start out by just talking about cyber threats. What is the threat environment, and what are the threats that you see out there currently that companies are facing, just in the on the net?
Sure. So I see the global threat landscape really is dynamic. It's evolving. It's changing. I think our threat actors are getting more complex and more frequent in the types of attacks. And I think the part that really concerns me is that we're seeing a change in the victim landscape. So we're seeing a change in both the adversaries and the victims. And so if you look at the adversaries, we have our traditional nation state actors: China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. A lot of the work that they've been doing there to attack critical infrastructure, small, medium-sized businesses here in the US, and really seeing, again, that increase in the complexity and the frequency of the attacks. I think with some of those nation states, we're also seeing changes in their tactics. So if we look at the PRC, for example, where lately we've seen them pre-positioning on US critical infrastructure, right? Which is not about espionage, it's not about spying, it's not about intellectual property. It really is to sow discord in the lives of day-to-day Americans. And that really is a pivot over what we've seen over the last 10 and 15 years in that cyber landscape. I think we add to that what we're seeing in cyber criminals and a lot of the work in ransomware and the attacks against businesses across the nation and public sector partners across the nation. And there really, as we look at sectors, we're seeing sectors that are being attacked that have never been attacked before. So the example I like to use is healthcare, right? If we go back to centuries of kinetic warfare, we never bombed hospitals. We never attacked tents with the Red Cross on it. We never impacted physicians, nurses, medics. They were always kind of protected and somewhat off limits. We don't see that in the cyber landscape. We see attacks against hospitals, against healthcare facilities, healthcare distributors, people in this ecosystem that in the past for centuries were somewhat considered off limits. So we're seeing those ransomware actors and those cyber criminals taking on those types of efforts. I think the other thing that's concerning is really ransomware as a service, right? I mean, I kind of jokingly tell people, it used to be hard to become a cyber criminal, right? If you wanted to be a cyber criminal, you had to recruit people, you had to build infrastructure, you had to have skills, you had to have a target, you had to have an ability to process, cryptocurrency, and kind of all this ecosystem needed to be there. With this increase we've seen in ransomware as a service, you don't need that anymore, right? You just need somebody that you want to attack, and you can hire people to do it for you, and they keep a percentage off the top, and you get what you're looking for. So we've seen that change in the adversary landscape that is challenging. I think we've similarly seen that change in that victim landscape, because in addition to groups like healthcare and others, we're seeing K through 12 schools in the heartland, retail companies, people who've never been targets before are now being seen as targets to a lot of these adversaries. So we're really in a space now where the adversaries are getting more complex and more frequent, and we're seeing this change in the victim landscape. And I think it's only going to get worse in the years to come.
Yeah, I know a lot of what we talk about in the development world is the democratization of AI, right? We see a lot of those same trends where now anybody can download an AI model, and I can do some image generation, or I can clean up a picture of my kids, and I can do all of these little things with AI. Well, we're also democratizing cyber threats, right? What you talked about of I can go download something off the web today, and now I can attack my local government, rather than before it took a concerted effort of I need 20 people all developing this hack, which means to make this worth my while, I've got to go after a nation, or I have to go after a major company. Some of those big targets that have a lot of money, I have to go after those to make this worth it. But today, yeah, if I can hire somebody to launch a ransomware attack for $1,000, I don't have to go after the United States, right? I can go after Howard County, Maryland, or Anne Arundel County, Maryland. And they don't have those same resources to be able to defend against these sorts of things. And even like you said with hospitals, right? It really hits home a lot more when you read on the news, oh, the county got hacked and they had a ransomware attack. But it's a different thing when you see it at your hospital. Your grandfather, your uncle, your aunt, their pacemaker has been compromised, and now there's a threat to pacemakers, or all of these devices that potentially have that that impact on people's day-to-day lives. Like you said, it's not just the cyber threat itself, it's the fear, it's the mistrust, and the, all of a sudden I don't, I go to the doctor and the doctor tells me I need a pacemaker, and I say, well, do I really need that? Because I heard they can be hacked, and it starts to snowball, it starts to domino into affecting other areas of life, and that's just as dangerous as the big threat.
I mean, definitely. I think, the hospitals are seen as a safe place, right? It's a place you go when you're hurt, when you're injured, when you're sick, when you're at your most vulnerable. And to think that safe place that you're depending upon to get better is, compromised or going to be a potential place of harm for you, it's even worse. And I think there's a lot of information out there, especially in the healthcare spaces. You look at medical devices and you look at IT systems and OT systems, to even tell what's real and what's not. There's a lot of research out there on what can be hacked and can't be hacked, what can be done in a lab versus what can be done in real life, and what can be done, in an environment. And so I think as we're seeing this great influx of technology into every sector. Healthcare is one, but we're seeing it in a lot of places. And I think that's amazing, right? I think I love technology. I think it's an amazing thing. We've seen tractors now with millions of lines of code in them, and the amount of data that they're sharing back and forth is really amazing. It's going to revolutionize a lot of the work that we're doing in these sectors. It's going to make it easier for us to be more productive, to really, just frankly become a more prosperous nation, right? I mean, these are all good things to happen, but as you pointed out, it's also things our adversaries know and our adversaries are using against us and trying to leverage. And that's really I think the fear that people have, and it's why we need to stay one step ahead. It's why we need to make sure that our defensive actions at all types of businesses and governments, not just large businesses and large governments, but small, medium-sized businesses, talking about county governments, local governments, have the tools and the expertise that they need to defend against these attacks. Because the PRC doesn't care if it's New York City or a small town in the heartland, right? I mean, they're coming at us regardless of size, scope, and scale. So we need that same level of defense and the same capability of defense across the board.
Yeah, and that's really kind of what inspired us to build CyberSpan. So we were looking at, first and foremost, we're a small business, right? So we understand all of these challenges, and we're fortunate that we are, we do a lot of work in the cybersecurity realm, in the AI realm. So we're pretty familiar with a lot of the threats out there. So we have a team that is working to keep our network safe, and they're constantly looking at the things that we see as threats to our network. But a lot of small businesses, especially ones in IT, or the ones that are not in IT, I should say, those businesses don't have that luxury, right? A lot of those companies they're running with a router that they bought from just a commercial ISP. And, they had their nephew who knows a lot about computers. Jimmy set up the router and he plugged everything in, and that's the last they think about it. And in reality, just again, going back to the target space and looking at who are the easy targets, right? I'm looking at these small businesses and I'm saying, I know they don't have the resources to secure themselves. So let's go after them. And then, the follow-on effects, not only is it all the things we talked about with sowing discord, with the fear and all of that, but also a lot of these businesses do business with the government. So now we've got sensitive information, even if it's not classified, we've got sensitive information that's on those networks. And before, where, if I were a bad actor, I might just say, well, I'm just going to go after that company. Ransomware, maybe I just shut down their network and I ask for $1 million, and maybe it puts them out of business. Maybe it doesn't. Whatever. I don't care. Well, instead, maybe now I say, well, it's way more valuable to me if I can just slowly pull information from them, if I can just exfiltrate their data over time, because I know who they work with, and I know that I'm going to see some sensitive data that's interesting to me if I just watch that for long enough. So I'm going to keep watching that company, and I'm going to also keep watching this company over here, and this company, and this company. And at some point, you've got this network of companies that you're watching, and you so everything that's coming through all of these companies, you're able to exfiltrate that data. So that's the fear, and that's what we were looking at as, okay, this is a problem, right? This is, if it happened to us, this would be catastrophic. It would be terrible. So what's stopping this from happening to all these other companies that don't have the same IT that we have, don't have the same cybersecurity protocols in place that we do? And the answer is not much. So that was sort of our first step, was, okay, well, we want to build something for these companies. And it's got to be something that they don't have to be an expert to use, right? I can give you lots of tools that if you you have a deep knowledge of database and network traffic analysis, and you know how to do your own PCAP and all that stuff. There's lots of tools that you can get that can help you do that analysis. But the whole point is that these companies don't have that expertise. So in our eyes, we're trying to say, what can we give them that they can still work with without having that level of expertise? And so that was the first challenge that we, kind of took on as a CyberSpan team. The second really big challenge that was, kind of keeping us up at night was that, we are, very broadly an IT company, but there are lots of different types of companies that do work with the government. There's manufacturing, there's financial, chemical, all kinds of companies. And all of these companies have networks that are going to look very different. So, for us, we have, even in our same physical office here, we have our, our back office. We've got our HR, our finance folks, our C-level, those kind of people. But we also have our IG Labs division, which is our R&D, the people who are doing a lot of the really cool cutting edge, tech, building out new capabilities, new functions, all of that stuff. Those two networks are separated and they look very different. I don't want to be running the same detection on, our finance team who is just using Excel and using, Microsoft Office and all that. I don't want to run the same network detection on their network as I'm running on our R&D lab, where we're going to test this malware and see if it would trip this, this detection that we're trying to build. They're doing very different things. That's an extreme example. But you've got the same thing when you look at a manufacturing company where maybe I just have a bunch of, IoT devices or something on my network, and that's what's happening. I only have one or two people who are doing, who are sitting in a computer all day, versus a finance company where maybe they look a lot more like our back office, where you've got 50 people that are all sitting in Excel all day. That's their job, or in, QuickBooks or whatever the case may be. So the capability has to learn. Right? It's got to be something that looks at your network and doesn't just say like, okay, well, here's what I'm looking for, and I'm just going to continue looking for this thing forever. It's got to be able to look at that network and say, all right, here's what is normal on the network. Here's how we expect things to look. So I want to understand when something deviates from that. And that's where the learning piece comes in. I think that's why AI is so important to a project and product like CyberSpan, which is trying to be a solution that can work for a lot of different companies very broadly. So I think that's why it's almost a must at this point, with how sophisticated cyber threats are, and how much they're going to differ based on the environment that they're operating in.
I think you hit the nail on the head, right? As we look at different sectors, there's every type of company out there that is engaging on this. If you look at something like a fighter jet, right? The volume of companies that are involved in what ultimately becomes, the F-35,
Exactly.
is massive, right? And there's lots of large businesses involved in that. There's lots of small businesses involved in that, but they all have the need and the requirement to have some type of strong cybersecurity element, because as you said, these actors are really just kind of watching everyone, right? And they're playing the long game, right? They're kind of, I like to say, it's almost like a Hoover vac, right? They're vacuuming everything up, and they'll put the pieces together later, and they'll figure it out. And if they can't do it today, they're willing to wait a year, 5 years, 10 years to put some of those pieces together. So really having that strong cybersecurity really is key. And to your point on staffing, that's always a challenge. I'm a company of one. I think one of the biggest struggles I had when I transitioned and did this was I became my own tech support, right? And I will say that was, of all the things I've had to do the last several months, that's been the most challenging.
So you are nephew Jimmy.
I'm nephew Jimmy. I'm my CIO, my CISA, my CFO. So anything that has tools that allow a small organization to do that is helpful. I've been to cities, decent sized cities, where their SOC is one person. And, that person was great. And I'm sure they were extremely confident and technically capable. But what can we expect one person to do? And assuming they sleep at night, how do we help these organizations, again, public and private sector, you really build these defenses? And to your point, AI is extremely helpful on the defensive side. It's sadly also effective and helpful on the offensive side. But we need to make sure we're using it on the defense. I tell people all the time, we need to deploy AI with intent, right? We need to know the tool. We need to know how it's working and how it's being used, how the models were trained, and really understanding how it's helping us, and having that transparency and knowing kind of how the tool is going to be helping us, where we still need to engage as human beings, right? I mean, everyone keeps saying it doesn't replace analysis, but it supports it and augments it, and knowing how it's augmenting. And I think it allows people to really focus their attention on the aspects of the business that need more time. It doesn't mean they can take their eyes off of cybersecurity per se, but it really allows them to focus, more time on the other aspects of the business, and let them use the great tools that AI has enabled us to create to help them raise their defensive posture.
Yeah, that's the AI. I'm glad you brought that up. The AI has been, so that's been a focus of IntelliGenesis for, as long as we've been a company. That was, kind of where we started and where we made our bread and butter early on. But that's always been a question that we've asked ourselves is ethically, right? And how do we use AI not to replace people, but to augment people? And that's always been our approach, is that, even today, as we have, ChatGPT and all the large language models that can write an essay for you, those still don't replace human intuition and human knowledge, human experience, all those things. I get asked actually all the time by my friends, my parents even asked me the other day. They said, are you worried that AI is going to replace you? And I told them, no, not even a little bit. Not today, at least. Down the road, maybe eventually. But today, we have AI that can generate, it can generate me some code, right? I can say, hey, I'm trying to do this thing in my software. Can you generate me some code to do that? And, 60, 70% of the time, it's actually pretty much right. But are you okay with being right 60 or 70% of the time? Like, I don't think that's not where the standard is. And that's not what users or humans in general are accustomed to, right? So we're accustomed to software that's right 99% of the time. The question is, how many nines are you going to give me? Not is it 60 or 70 or 80%. So I think that's where the human intuition comes in. And that's where you take the approach of AI as a tool, just like anything else. Microsoft Word is a tool. I don't trust it to just write everything for me, but it's great that it gives me a spell check. Sometimes I use a word that's not actually a word and it corrects me. But sometimes that word is an acronym, or it meant something else, or it's not a real word, but it's something I meant. So you need a human there to actually look at it and say, no, don't just autocorrect everything. AI is no different. We don't want to replace humans when say like, hey, you don't need a cybersecurity team at all. You don't need anybody to watch your network. Just CyberSpan will do it. No, what we want to do is augment the user. We want to say, hey, I know you're busy. You're one person. You're looking over this whole company. You're busy. You don't have time to sit and stare at a dashboard or stare at, data coming in and watch the chart go like this. And you don't have time to do that. So it's our job to do that part for you and provide you the information so that you can be the decision maker on the back end. And we want to use AI in that way. So yes, we absolutely look at the traffic, look at network traffic. We generate, hey, here's things that I think are going on. Here's things that I think are unusual, right? That's really the big strength of I think our AI approach, is that we've got, you can use AI to kind of identify specific attacks. And that's one thing. But I think the strongest thing that it does is it lets you identify anomalies. And so we look at it as, okay, let's build our AI models that will go in and learn, as I said before, learn what the network looks like normally. And then it can identify anomalies. Then let's apply some logic, some intuition, some signatures, lots of extra stuff on top of that to say, hey, I don't want to alert you every time something strange happens on your network. That's a million times a day. That's going to very quickly make you say, okay, I'm not going to look at this anymore. I don't need to see this. I don't have time for that. What we want to do instead is say, okay, this thing that was strange happened on your network. Do I see some other evidence that I can put with that to say, oh, it wasn't just something weird. It also looks like this known malicious thing that we know about. Or this was a little bit weird, but then we saw 3 more weird things, that were also associated with maybe that IP or whatever the case may be. So we want to, take that approach both with the user and both in our processing and our analytics, where we say, I'm not just going to build an AI model and drop it on you and say, here you go. Here's what it is. Here's how it works. We're going to then try to apply some expertise on top of that. because that's the value that humans bring, is that experience, that expertise, and that ability to not just say, hey, this looks weird, that ability to say, this looks weird, and it looks like this other thing that we know about, or it doesn't look like anything else we know about, so I'm going to leave it over here for now. The other, kind of big piece of that is, well, when we do tell you this thing looks weird, or we do tell you it looks like this other known bad thing that we have, why? Why did we say that? The big push with AI, especially as it does grow and it becomes so pervasive, is explainability, right? How can we tell you that this is what the computer thought, but we can't explain why? I can't tell you, how did it come up with that? Why did it come up with that? What was it looking at? What was it using? If I can't answer any of those questions, you wouldn't accept that answer from a human, right? If a person just came in and, if you went to your doctor and they just came in and said, oh, yep, here's what's wrong. You've got this, you've got this disease. You would say, well, okay, did you do a test? Did you take my blood? Did you, why do you think that? And, if they just said, I don't know, right, you probably wouldn't keep going to that doctor. So that's the approach we take, is we try to say, okay, what can we tell the user about why we said this was the case? If I see some traffic that's anomalous, that I think is strange, well, if we say it's strange, that means there had to be something else that we compared it to and saw it wasn't like this over here. So let me show you, with some nice visualizations of like, okay, here are the other things that were almost like it, but here's what made them different. And I can give you that information. I can tell you about how our AI models are trained. I can tell you about, when I say, hey, this anomalous, unusual traffic looked like some other, it looked like this malicious attack I know about. Let me tell you what we think that attack looks like. I can tell you it was this many connections. It went to, on an external IP. I can give you all that information. And a lot of that can be information overload, right? And that's where we kind of circle back to, how do we make this user friendly? Because the whole point is that I need to be able to give you this, and it needs to work for you at your level. So if you are brand new, you're a novice, IT, you're the one IT person who doesn't really know a whole lot, I want to be able to give you, here's the highlight. Like, hey, I think this is what happened. Now, if you are an expert, if you are someone who has a lot of experience doing cybersecurity work, I want you to be able to get that same highlight, and I want you to be able to drill down on it. So now I can click into it and I can start to see, oh, here's the actual associated network traffic. Here's the explanation for why you thought this was, this was unusual or this was weird. Here's your AI models. Maybe you have some AI experience. We'll tell you, hey, here's the AI models that we used. Here's how we trained them. Here's all of this information. And the idea is we want to make it accessible in a way that, you can drill until you feel like you've had enough. And, once you feel like you understand and you're satisfied, you can stop there. But we want to make as much available to you as we possibly can.
I think it's great. I mean, I think explainability, transparency when it comes to AI is something that I think in every form and every tool we talk about is a need to have that transparency, and that be able to explain it and go to the depth that you're comfortable with, right?
Mm-hmm.
If and to your point, if I stop here, that's great. But if there's others who can go deeper, or you end up in a situation where you're bringing in folks to help on the outside, or you're reaching out to folks that have deeper knowledge, they have the ability to go in and do that with a little bit more detail. And I think it's great. I mean, I think it's those types of features and capabilities we want to see in tools that people are using, so that they really are able to get a tool that's scalable, that can be used by different people within the organization. Frankly, I think the hope of every small business is they grow right over time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So right now I'm the CFO, CIO, CISO, but maybe at some point I'm not, and I have somebody who can come in and do other things, and have that ability to do that. I think is great, and be able to stick with the same type of tool and service over time that grows with you in the organization is great as well. And I think as we look at a lot of the small businesses today, we're seeing a lot more growth. We're seeing, especially in a lot of sectors, we're going to hopefully continue to see more growth among small and medium-sized businesses. And I think tools that they can carry with them throughout kind of their growth journey is always a wonderful thing as well.
Yeah, one of the cool things that we try to do to sort of support that is we have sort of this notion of a management dashboard where so we we'll deploy a sensor out to, your network. So it'll sit on your network. It watches your traffic, does the analysis, all that fun stuff. But say you've got multiple offices, like, maybe today you've got your one office, but eventually you're super successful. Maybe you open another office in Florida, right? IntelliGenesis, we've got another office in Georgia, as well as another one in Texas. Well, we want to protect those offices as well, right? I'd love to have a CyberSpan at all my offices. So what we do is we say, okay, well, we can deploy a sensor to, as many locations as you want, and we can have them all feeding data into one aggregated management dashboard. So as a company, you can say, okay, well, today I only have one, but as I grow, I love CyberSpan. I wish I had another one. Great. We can give you another one. You can have it at 2 locations. You can have those 2 locations both processing data from their local network, sending that data up to one place so you can see, hey, here are the common things that are happening on both of my networks, or here's things that are happening over here but not over there. And we even have some AI models built in there to say, okay, based on the characteristics of each of those locations, do we see any activity that we should alert each other about? Because that's one of the strengths, at large scale. Imagine we've got Cyberspan, deployed to hundreds of companies, and they're all over the world. We want to be able to see how much are those companies seeing that's similar. So if I see something at companies A, B, and C who are all manufacturers of some certain F-35 component, well, I want to warn all the other manufacturers of that component that they need to be careful. They need to be on the lookout. Here's what might be coming for you. So I think like you said, the scalability is really important, and I think that's something that we try to sort of support as well.
I think the visibility piece really is key. As you said, I think right now we lean on a lot of the information sharing post attack, right? So somebody becomes a victim, we then eventually realize somebody's victim, then we understand how to mitigate against that vulnerability, and we share that more broadly with the broader ecosystem, with other companies, organizations, other countries, so that they can protect themselves against that. I think the more we're able to get into that predictive state of being able to say, we're seeing something that just doesn't look right, how are we able to help others who may not be seeing that type of activity yet, is really where we get into that preventive side. And that's where we raise our resilience baseline as a nation, and frankly, as a planet, against what we're seeing as common threat actors out there. So yeah, I think as we talk about the threats and what we're seeing, it's easy for a small and medium-sized business to feel overwhelmed, right? I mean, as we were kind of joking earlier, you're the CIO, the CISO, the CFO, and everything, and you have organizations large and small, those that are growing, those that aren't, those that have expertise, and those that don't. I think there's a lot of things that small and medium-sized businesses can do to help protect themselves against nation-state actors, against cyber criminals that are out there. I mean, some of it is the basic fundamentals, right? We tell people, use complex passwords,
Yep.
Right? I mean, that's an easy one.
Change them every so often.
Don't tape your password to your keyboard. Don't tape them under the keyboard. That's not any safer. Things like multi-factor authentication. Looking at phishing attacks. And I tell people all the time that I will guarantee everybody that nobody's ever going to send you $1 million via email, right? Like that's
I'm not sure. Are you really sure
I don't
about
think
that?
via email. I think they show up to your house with this big check in their hands
Right.
and balloons and things like that. So really doing those basics. Getting obviously patching is a huge thing. I always tell people that your software, your phone is being updated for a reason and a purpose behind it. It's not just for new emojis, which everyone loves new emojis, but often it's for security purposes as well. So it's important to do those things, in a timely manner. But I think it's also, as you go out there and you start looking at growth and coming up with, what tools what solutions are out there? How do I go ahead and really continue to push kind of my cyber defense, build my resilience within my organization, is really finding those tools that are geared and aimed towards those small and medium-sized businesses that understand the challenges and limitations that those businesses have, and really being able to meet their needs with both, strong technical acumen, but also, frankly, where we don't have strong technical backgrounds in some of our businesses, to be able to help fill that gap by using technology and AI and those types of services. I think there's a lot out there that can help make small and medium-sized businesses' lives easier when it comes to cybersecurity. And really looking at those types of tools like CyberSpan really is one of those areas where I think it can make people's lives more secure and easier. I think the other piece, when we think about cyber defense, a lot of people think, I don't have to worry about that, right? I'm a small business. Nobody knows I'm here. they forget a lot of these attacks that we're seeing around the globe are not targeted to a specific company, but they're essentially attacks of opportunity, right? We've identified a vulnerability and we're essentially spraying this vulnerability out throughout the globe and trying to take advantage of that. We've seen this in attacks against programmable logic controllers and others, where nation states have said, we're just going to go after people with default passwords, right? Yep. And if you change your default password, you're fine. If you didn't change your default password, you became a victim. And I think that getting organizations to realize that there are tools out there that can help them, that can build that resilience. It's even more critical, I think, in small and medium-sized businesses, right? Where they can't afford to take that impact. They can't afford to be down for a day. They can't afford to pay a ransom. They can't afford, these bumps that, frankly, larger organizations might be able to sustain. It ends up running the risk of putting you out of business, especially for some of these businesses that have been family run or that have been generational in their families. The thought of losing that to a cyber attack can be daunting, and really looking for those tools and capabilities to help them build that defense in today's threat landscape really is key.
Yeah. We had a company that we were actually a government customer that we were working with, where we saw that they had used the same company to set up the same IT company to set up their network at the courthouse in this town as they had at one of the elementary schools. And turned out they configured everything exactly the same, including using the same password, which was the default password on both routers. So what we did is, we were working with the courthouse, kind of the municipal government there. And we said, hey, we found this just doing our cursory checking for everything. And the first part of your problem is that you're just using the default password. But the second part of your problem is you hired this guy to do your install. Well, lots of people in town have hired that guy to do their install. And so, yeah, maybe somebody is watching your network, and maybe if they try to attack you and they do a few things, you're going to catch some of that. But what you don't know is they've got a staging ground over here at the elementary school where nobody's watching an elementary school network. No one's really monitoring that. And if something goes wrong and the internet's down for a couple of days, it's not the end of the world at the elementary school. I'm sure the kids hate it, but we can still have school without the internet. But now I've got a place as an attacker. I can go practice, right? I can go test stuff out over there. I can go see, let me see what version of the firmware that router's running. Let me see what all these things are happening. And if something goes wrong, nobody's really going to suspect it. And so a lot of companies have, if not that first degree problem of like, I am the vulnerability, they have the second degree problem of, well, other people have this same setup as I do because I don't have a lot of options and I don't have the expertise. So you've got the company that maybe you are doing a lot of things right, but there's always kind of that ancillary danger that, that can come for you. So it's a hard problem. It's a hard problem to solve. And I know a lot of companies also look at that as, how do I protect my network without hiring a massive team of people to do it, but also without exposing, a bunch of my information to the people who are doing it. And so that's actually a question we get all the time. When we talk to our customers that we're installing CYBERSPAN, they say, well, can you guys look at our traffic? You're looking at all of our network traffic? You see it? And we say, well, so we are, collecting the network traffic. We're getting everything, everything does come through the system, but most everything in 2025, almost everything is encrypted. All of your traffic, when you go to Amazon and you want to buy something, you put in your credit card number, that's all encrypted. That's all, that's the HTTPS in your browser,
So you're not reading all my emails.
Right. All my exactly. All of that stuff is encrypted, and we don't decrypt it. We don't try to, figure out what it actually says or what any of that says. No, that's not what we're looking at. Because we're not trying to look at your emails. We're not trying to steal your credit card number. We're not trying to do any of that. What we care about is, what devices are talking to what other devices, right? I don't care that you sent this schematic or this spec or this blueprint to, I don't care that what you're sending, but I do care where it's going, right? I may not care that that's a blueprint or a schematic, but I do care that I saw, 500 megabytes go out to an IP that, geolocates to potentially being in China or in Russia or, someplace that I don't think your network should be talking to. So let me alert you on that. Let me tell you about that. And I don't need to know what actually went out. Once we figure out, hey, this was some sort of a breach, this is data exfil, then sure, we're going to do that research and we'll figure it out. And we'll work with the company to figure that out. But ultimately, that's not what we're trying to do, right? I don't have any interest or any need to know what your data is, but I do care a lot about where it's going and making sure that it's not going anywhere that you don't think it should be going. So that's always been our approach to the privacy question and the, how do you help me without, taking all my data? One of the things when we first started CYBERSPAN, just first started developing it, I talked to our CTO, and my big question to him was, what type of thing would you want in a tool? Because he also heads our IT. And I asked him, what would you like in this tool? What types of things would you like it to do? And he gave me a big list. Oh, I'd like it to do this, and I'd like it to scan the traffic. I'd like it to scan all the emails and tell me if there's a phishing email, and I'd like it to do just lots and lots of stuff. And I said, okay, well, what if I came to you as if I didn't work here and I came to you as another company and offered to sell you this product, and I told you all you have to do is let me decrypt all your emails and scan them. And he said, oh, absolutely not. No, we can't. You can't have that. I said, okay, well, let's go back to question number one and let's reevaluate, right? So that was something that we were looking at right from the beginning because again, IntelliGenesis is we are the prototype of a company that could use something like this. A company that's our size, that maybe doesn't have all the IT experience that we have, but the type of company that would use this tool. And so it's got to be something that works for us. That's always been our number one. Our first test was, let's use it here at IntelliGenesis. Even today, our test environment for CYBERSPAN is the IntelliGenesis network. We deploy every change that goes out to our users. We deploy it here first. It runs. Our IT team is looking at it. We do all that stuff. We eat our own dog food, as the expression goes. It's so important that we respect those things that companies value. I would always expect that a company is going to push back on me being another company and saying, I want access to your data. So that's always our priority, is how do we give you good detection, good analysis, all of those things that you need without requiring you to give us any of the stuff that we don't need.
Oh, that's great. I think, data privacy, we know everyone's talking about data privacy these days, and what's happening with information, what's happening with my information, my intellectual property, and who can see it, who may not be able to see it. And I think you hit a great point, is what we're seeing in the threat landscape of, adversaries exfilling data from companies, right? And again, really with that long game in mind of, I'm just going to collect, a piece of this puzzle each day, and it may take me 5 years, but at 5 years, I have that puzzle. Mm-hmm. And I know what that picture is, and now I can act and do something with it. And so, knowing that I have information from my network going to a location that is suspect, knowing that it's going out in volumes that, frankly, we don't traditionally see, right? Mm-hmm. And that ability to go back and baseline, and maybe it does make sense, right? Because you took on a new project, or you started some new work, and that's resulted in an increase, or maybe nothing has happened and everyone's on vacation, and you're seeing this massive spike, and knowing that that's there really is, I think, vital to be able to have that next level of questioning and understanding and details. And maybe the data is going to a country of concern, but it's by intention, right? I mean, A lot of companies do business all over the globe, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Yep. But knowing that it's with intent and by design, as opposed to, for nefarious purposes, is always a great thing to know. And I think we hope with a lot of this type of detection work, right, is that 99% of the time we find that it was supposed to be that way, but really kind of that time that it wasn't supposed to be that way, that it can be acted upon quickly to know what happened, where it went, what the potential impacts and consequence may be, to mitigate against that in the future. And this is only going to get more challenging. And I think, again, the complexity and frequency of attacks are increasing. It's only going to get harder for businesses to protect themselves, which is why I think having these tools that are scalable, adaptable to organizations, that can be utilized by people who both have super technical backgrounds and those with less technical backgrounds, they're really making it important for us in the months and years to come.
Yeah. And that's some of that, that's where the AI helps, right? It's like you said, everything is constantly changing. Everything, every company is a little bit different. So, we've got that AI piece that's hopefully looking at it and saying, well, all right, you guys just, took on a project where you're working with, a company in Eastern Europe or something. So maybe I now start seeing that network traffic going, over there. Maybe I see it as, okay, that is your normal, that is kind of your normal traffic now because I'm seeing it enough and I kind of understand. So I think that's one of the big places that AI can sort of help, is that it sort of keeps track of what you're doing, and it can change and evolve with your company as you're doing different things, as you change what your priorities are, who you're working with, who your partners are, all of those things. And that's why it's a big piece of what we try to do is to be flexible and learn from what we're seeing happening. So I think that's a huge thing. I think that's also a big consideration for, it's different for different industries, right? So I think for a lot of companies that do work with the government, you're going to see probably less of that sort of thing happening. For bigger companies, obviously that's going to be a norm. Like you've got offices all over the world that, that's going to happen. But for your small and medium-sized businesses, IntelliGenesis probably isn't taking on any partners in Eastern Europe anytime soon. And so a lot of your smaller businesses, you're not going to see that sort of thing happen as much. And likewise with, places like, local governments, right? You're not going to see that sort of thing happen. And so we want to make sure that our models, our AI is learning, and it's not just, hey, here's how we trained it and go forth and, we're going to say everybody who's talking to Russia, this is a problem. We should, here's, big flashing red light. We're going to say like, okay, let's learn from your network. Do you have partners in that region? Do you normally have people logging in from that region? What does all this look like normally? And let's adjust there. And I think that's, like I said, there's a lot of interesting challenges there when you look at kind of different areas. So you've got areas like small, medium-sized businesses, but you've also got the, educational institutions, right? If I wanted to go deploy a CyberSpan at the University of Maryland, right? That's a very different environment than what we would look at any company, really. And you'd have a lot more traffic that's going to a lot of different places all around the world because you've got researchers, you've got students from all around the world. So that sort of environment is going to be very, very different. But I think that's also really important for us to also engage with, because I know, small and medium-sized businesses is sort of where the focus begins for Cyberspan. But we're also looking at, how do we help local governments? How do we help, Howard County, Anne Arundel County, these local governments in Maryland, state governments, around the country? How do we help these people? Because they have a lot of the same challenges that small and medium-sized businesses do. If I walk into City Hall in a small town, they've got that same network set up where they've got one IT guy who's trying to do it all and he's holding everything together. And he has no visibility into all the stuff that's running and everything that's on the network. That guy needs help too. And he's facing all the same problems as the small company, IT person. So that's a place where we're looking at and saying, hey, we can help. We're dealing with a lot of these same problems. And normally, if a company wants to walk in the door and say, hey, we've got this tool, you should buy it and use it to secure your network. Well, if they're selling that tool to, a company of 10,000 people, it's not going to do the thing you want. If it's, if they're selling you the same tool, they need to be selling you something that is going to learn, something that's going to look at your network as an individual. And it's going to say, okay, well, the stuff that you are seeing on your network, I'm going to learn about that and I'm going to understand that before I start telling you that, hey, you shouldn't be talking to this country over here, when no, your department chair has a partner who, he's writing a research paper with that country over there. So, that's a totally different thing. And it's really important to be able to differentiate those things.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, everyone's baseline is different, right? So being able to know that your your tool, your solution is based on your unique baseline, based on your operations, that changes with your operations as time goes on, as you grow or you change or take on new projects or identify new partners. And, it really isn't, to me, when I look at critical infrastructure, it's not about public or private sector, it's about public and private sector. So if you look across the country, there are water utilities that are private sector, there's water utilities that are public sector. You look at schools, there's private schools, there's public schools. You look at hospitals, you have public hospitals, you have private hospitals. And, one shouldn't be any less protected than the other. And I think, when you look at county governments, I think county governments often have a challenge of, every county is different, right? I mean, you've gone to one county, you've gone to one county, but counties that I've worked in the past, ran utilities and hospitals, and other counties didn't, right? So, the county infrastructure could be small, could be just kind of that county government, or it could be vast. And when they're overseeing universities or academic centers and schools and hospitals and water utilities and others. So really having that ability to flex, within what is a county, because every county will be different, really helps that tailored solution to that entity. Again, at the end of the day, to me, it's about resilience, right? It's about how do we build resilience against these adversaries that we're continuing to see. And, any tool that helps us build resilience that I don't have to invest thousands of people on, really is a win. And things that give us the ability to really, that ask us the questions that we can then figure out what the answers are, with the hope that, again, 99% of the time it's explainable.
Hopefully it's nothing,
and we don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, that's one of the hard parts of our job, is that, for us, right, the false positive is good news for the company, right? It's they don't want. They don't want 1,000 bad, happening in a day, right? So when something bad pops up, you say on one hand, well, I hope we're not wrong. I hope our system is working correctly. But on the other hand, like if it is, that means something bad is about to, something bad has happened to this company. So it's a tough balancing act, and that's something that we're, that's the sort of the human facing part of it, is the unfortunateness of hey, we're trying to detect bad things, so when we succeed, that means something bad has happened. But it's also, it also kind of gets down into the human of, I've got to look at all these things, and if I'm showing you 1,000 things every day, I'm not going to look at them. No human's looking at 1,000 of anything, in a day. That's not going to happen. So it's also, really important that we don't have, those false positives, right? In a perfect world, I'd show you, one thing when it happens and nothing else, anytime that nothing was happening. I'd never show you anything. But in practice, that's not how this works. And that's not how a responsible system should work, right? I would rather show you a few false positives to make sure that I'm going to show you the one real one, versus really, really clamping down on those false positives and saying, I'm not going to show you anything until I'm 1,000% sure that it's malicious activity, something's going on. Because if I do that, I'm not going to show you the times where here's where 60 or 70% is okay. Yeah. If I'm not going to show you the times where I was 70% sure that something bad was happening. And if enough of those 70s are happening, something probably is happening. So it's a tough balancing act. And this, it all circles back to the user and how we augment the user and how we support the user. But yeah, how do we show them as much as they need to see, but no more? And that's always a hard problem in any sort of, really not even a computer problem, but any sort of human problem, is how do you show a person enough and not show them too much? And so that's one of the things that we always, kind of, work with and try to improve at. And a big part of that is that's why we typically put some logic on top of the AI model. We don't just let the AI be the be all end all. We say, okay, well, great, we've got this output from this AI, this thing that looks suspicious. Let's see if we can do a little more. Let's see if we can figure out a little bit more of what's happening there. Let's see if we can rule out some of this stuff. We also look at, external threat feeds. There's a huge community of cyber experts who are constantly looking at, what's going on the global internet. Hey, I know that this company is scanning the internet. nonstop. They just are continuously scanning everybody. Well, to us and, to a cyberspan, that may look like, oh, well, somebody's trying to hit your network. Somebody's pinging all the ports on your, on your switch. And it looks like they're trying to get into your network. Well, if we can also see that, well, okay, that's actually a company that's known to do internet scanning, you probably don't care about that. So that, we pull in threat data to try to do that. We also will prioritize, and we give you a priority and a confidence for all of our alerts. So we'll tell you like, okay, well, yeah, we see this thing coming in that looks like it might be some sort of malicious activity, but also it's from a known internet scanning service that is not malicious. They're just scanning everything. So maybe we mark that as a low priority, and that way, if you don't have anything else to look at, sure, maybe spend a couple minutes checking on it. But if you've got some things that we can tell are more important, they look more malicious, they look scarier to us, we're going to label those high priority. So start there. Start with looking at those high priority things. And we're going to do our best to give you an accurate representation of what that priority should be and how certain we are that this is something bad. Is this the 60, 70% certainty? Is it the 99% certainty? Is it the 20% certainty? And that way you can kind of decide, and you can, if you've got an IT team of 5 or 10 folks, yeah, they can probably actually go through and look at all those. If I gave you 100 things a day, they could go through and look at them. But that's not the reality for the most part. Is we're dealing with teams of 1 or 2 people. So I think it's really important to give them that sort of high priority. Here's the big ones. Here's what you really need to look at, and that's 1 or 2 things a day, a couple things a day. But then I also will give you these mediums and these lows, which are probably nothing. But if you've got other indications, if something's going on, if your network is slow today, like everybody's been complaining, I can't eat, my emails aren't going out. Maybe you do start digging into some of those low priority ones and see, because maybe this is the time where that 20% did happen. Something was going on. Maybe this is the time it wasn't just an internet scanner. Maybe you are being DDoSed, by some nation state actor. So, it all comes back to communication with the user, and how do we convey to them what the system thinks, what the system knows, how certain it is, how confident, what should they be looking at? How should they prioritize their time and their effort?
And I think, as you said, the flexibility really is the key, right? I mean, I could focus on the high priority. I could, have bandwidth to look a little bit deeper and look at high and medium priorities and really understand kind of what's happening out there. I think it's those types of things are going to help organizations that have resource constraints to be able to, to still, again, kind of maintain that right defensive posture. At the same time, not being inundated with everything, right? I mean, seeing, as you were saying earlier, kind of 1,000 things a day doesn't really help you, and it's hard to do, and you also become numb to it, right? I mean, I kind of joke, it's you go to some offices where they have a sign on the door that says, did you forget your keys, or did you do you have your ID card, or do you have your what have you, right? And you become numb to it after a day, right? Because you go through that door, however many times a day, and after a week or 2 weeks, you don't even read that anymore. And I think this is where I think using AI and using kind of logic layered on top is really helpful to help really make sure that you're seeing something that you have to pay attention to. Go ahead and pay attention to it versus kind of getting lost in the day to day. Because I worry that when people are seeing too much of the same thing every day, and whether that's again a sign on the door versus cyber or network alerts, you just become numb to it, and you don't really pay any attention to it. So I think finding that right frequency of I need to be concerned, I really need to look at this and dedicate the time to it really is important, and that prioritization really helps that to happen.
Yeah. That's what we get from our users, constantly is, hey, we really want to make sure that we're not seeing too many false positives. That's really what it's one of the problems we had, initially starting off was, we would alert on lots of things that, looked kind of suspicious. And we said, well, we should really tell the user everything. We should make sure they know everything. And that results in, here's 500 alerts today. Here's 1,500 alerts tomorrow. Here's, and, very quickly realize like, okay, well, that's definitely not the right way to do this. We can't just show you everything. And that's where the value in these types of tools comes in, is how do I make life easier? How do I help the user to really see what's important? how do I make sure that they're not completely inundated and they don't just become numb to it? Because ultimately that's, to really kind of go all the way back to the beginning of the conversation, I think that's where we are a lot with cyber attacks, right? You see a cyber attack in the news every week. You see this company got ransomware, this company, this happened, they had all their data stolen. Oh, this company went out of business because they got hacked. And at some point it's just overwhelming and you just, I don't know what to do. I can't figure anything out. I don't know what to do. And so you just kind of give up. But I think that's what we can really try to prevent. And we really try to focus on how do we make this valuable and helpful.
And I think, again, doing it in a way that's transparent and understandable, and helps you take the next steps with mitigation, and all of that really is key. And it's a great way, again, to raise resilience and to help protect your organization, again, public or private sector.
Well, this has been a great talk, Nitin. Thank you so much for coming and talking with us today. I think it helps me to really get the perspective of both kind of small business owner as well as somebody who's got the experience dealing with these problems. So really appreciate your time and thanks for coming.
No, thanks for having me here. I mean, it's great to talk about solutions that we can use with partners across the nation, again, both in the public and the private sector, in our critical infrastructure spaces, in academia and NGOs, and kind of across the board, to help them build resilience, because we need to build more resilience and cyber defenses against these evolving threats. And these are the types of tools that are going to do it.